morning, everybody. Welcome to the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Programs Council meeting. Today is July 13th, 9:30. We'll have a Pledge of Allegiance. Call to order. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Wasn't flowing out. Once again, good morning. Just a quick note, I will have to depart at 11:30. Wedding of a young lady that I almost nearly raised since age 7. Not my daughter, but still, I'll be leaving for that. All right, agenda revisions. You'll see a couple of notes. Do you want to walk through those, Dwayne?
Yes, we have two agenda revisions from staff based on input from council. We have a new management board appointment from Commissioner Susan Adams. That will be under new business, item 10D. And you'll notice that we also have a couple under consent. And we have, because of your timeline, Mr. Chair, we've requested to move up agenda item 10C, the legislative position statements for federal and state, just under consent agenda, so you have an opportunity to vote on those. And that's all we have from staff.
Okay, and the way you said that it was under consent, it's not under consent.
The new management board appointment will be new business, item 10D. The legislative position will be moved out of new business and under. It'll be right after consent.
Okay.
We'll still leave it new business, but we'll take it early.
Okay, that's what I wanted to make sure was clear. All right, is council okay with those adjustments? Thank you very much. All right, next item is the new management board appointment. Looks like we have the appointment of Paul Carlisle, City Manager of the City of Sebastian, to the Management Board by Susan. Is there a motion?
Yes. I move approval.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you very much. Okay. Resolutions, recognitions, and letters or awards. We see none at this time on the agenda. Public comment. I'd like to recognize Cesar Zapata, Deputy Director, Wastewater Protection Division, United States Environmental Protection Agency, Region 4. Oh, there you are. I was waiting for somebody to come over here, but good morning, sir.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here as part of the board, and I haven't been coming here often, but Jennifer DeMeyer usually is here, so I'm here. For her, it's been a while since I've been here, but I look forward to the communication. I know there's been a lot of work in the CCMP done, and we'll talk a little more at that time that we fully support the efforts going on. Okay, thank you and welcome. Nice to have you. This is public comment. I don't have any comment cards, so I'll give a moment if anybody didn't have time to give us a card, public comment. Seeing no movement, we will close public comment, come back to the board, council. Audit finding report. Who's going to take this? Looks like Frank. Half of Frank.
Half of Frank. Good morning and thank you. Our auditors from James Moore and Company have concluded their audit, and I'd like to have James Halloran come forward, CPA and partner with the firm, and present those findings to you.
Thank you, Frank. Good morning, sir.
Morning, everyone. There we go. So I gave you a brief little PowerPoint here so you can follow along, but thank you very much for having us do your audit. See our Volusia County representative, very happy from my area to have always someone on the council. So inside of your audit report, the large package, probably about 40 pages long, there's 4 audit reports, or 4 things you'll see in there that are on our letterhead from James Moore and Company. The rest are, of course, the financial statements for you guys. They're your financial statements, the responsibility of management and the council. But in that, we audited both on the U.S. auditing standards, government auditing standards, as well as the Auditor General has 2 additional reports we're required to include as well. So your independent auditor's report on the financial statements is on page 1 and 2. It's an unmodified opinion, which the best opinion we can give as independent certified public accountants. States that your financial statements present fairly in all material respects your financial position, results of operations for the year ended September 30th, 2017. If you have any questions as I go along, feel free, interrupt, ask. Doesn't bother me at all. The next set of reports that you'll see on that slide is under government auditing standards, we're required to look at your internal control of financial reporting as well as compliance. And with that, we have no findings to report under that report. Auditor General report, it lists about 10 different items we're required to look at from the Auditor General, from anywhere from financial condition assessment to looking at different reports that are filed with the state, and do they agree back to your audited financial statements, and we had no findings related to the Auditor General report. We also have the Independent Accountant's Examination Report, which deals specifically with investment statutes to make sure we're required to look at the investment statute and see if you're in compliance with the investment statute for the state of Florida, and you guys are. So no comments there as well. But if you remember last year, we did have some comments. So last year we had 3 comments. So it's always good to see from my clients that, hey, if we had suggestions and comments in a previous year, how staff addressed those. And I'm happy to report that all 3 prior findings have been addressed by staff in the current year. So congratulations, Frank, and also working with Special District Services as well to resolve the accounting side of those issues. So I always get asked, how's our financial health? People always kind of want to know, are we good? Are we bad? How are we looking? Well, the Auditor General, as I mentioned, requires us to do a financial condition assessment. And what that does, for you guys, it only looks at 2 years, but eventually you guys will have 5 years of comparison for yourselves, but it also benchmarks you against the similar entities in the state. So with that, you guys are considered inconclusive, which is really just another word for average. Just means you're not favorable, but you're not unfavorable. So we're able to analyze 13 of those financial indicators. There could be up to 30, but you guys are a smaller type government, so you don't have enterprise type funds and business type activities, so you don't fall into all those. But you have 3 favorable, 1 unfavorable, and 9 inconclusive. So changes this year. So when you look at your financial statements, you would see, okay, what really happens with the Indian River Lagoon Council? Where really does your revenue come from? Well, the big part, of course, is your member contributions still. You had a large increase in those member contributions for this year, primarily because you got some money from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. That's $250,000 that you didn't have in the previous year. You also would notice that, why did our license plate revenue go down? You might say, well, wouldn't that be pretty consistent, people having a license plate, renewing it? Remember, previously, St. John's River Water Management District, and they still hold the money, and they flow it through to you guys, but they had accumulated money, that hadn't been spent yet, so they basically gave you whatever they had accumulated up to that point in time when you guys created, they flowed all that money to you. You did have an increase in expenses, which is a good thing, because the biggest part of that increase in expenses was about $400,000 for the St. Lucie Basin project. So that doing what your purpose is, getting the money back out there to improve the environment around you. Then you also had a full year of admin costs, because you had this, your first year you didn't have a full year of salaries and administrative costs. This year you do. So that makes up that increase of about $560,000. Your total fund balance, if you're trying to figure out what do we really have left at the end of the year, you had about $1.6 million in your fund balance for your general fund. About 1.3 of that is unassigned, meaning you could use it for the purposes of IRL. The other part, about $333,000, is restricted for the license plate monies going forward. 2 note disclosures I would point out in the financial statements. Your employees are part of the Florida retirement system, so there's a calculation that goes into that to record that liability. Your responsibility is to pay the percentage that the state of Florida develops for those employees. So you do have to record that. Then there's some recent accounting pronouncements that may affect you guys. One we know for sure is the one GASB 75, which is other post-employment benefits. This relates to health insurance. You guys recently just moved on to Brevard County's health insurance, pooling in with the county employees. You're able to provide a better level of coverage for your employees at a less cost. But there's also some accounting things we have to deal with when we have that, because you have to record out into the future if someone retires that they could still stay on your health insurance. So, but James Moore already deals with that with 2 other entities in Brevard County, so we're very familiar with the Brevard County health insurance pool that they have. So that'll be something you'll see in next year's financial statements. The other one that may apply for you guys going forward, but it's, you may think it's out there a little ways, 2021, but is leases. Anything dealing with leases would have to be changed, how that's accounting for in your financial statements. And that is all I have, but if you have questions, comments, suggestions, I'm always willing to take them.
Okay, thank you. Questions from the council? Hearing none?
All right.
Thank you, sir, and great job, staff. Appreciate you keeping us financially stable and sound.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.
Okay, moving right along.
Mr. Chair,
I make,
we'll need a motion to accept.
I'll
Okay,
make a motion to accept the audit.
we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any comments or questions on the item? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. All right, thank you, Dwayne, for keeping me on track. All right, the Management Conference Committee reports. We'll start with Kathy Lamartina. Where'd she go? I know I saw her. There she is. Good morning.
Oh, good morning. Well, we had a very productive management board meeting, even though the management board really didn't talk a whole bunch. We did a lot of listening. We did approve the minutes. We accepted the committee reports. There was an update. We listened to an update on the IRL enhanced circulation flow. And one thing that the management board did decide was that we wanted to keep that option on the table, but that we absolutely needed more information to be able to determine whether we wanted to move forward with any type of pilot project. We also recommended that the board of directors approve the draft CCMP to be posted and to adopt the budget amendments and business plans, and also to fund the top 12 small grants projects. And other than that, it was a pretty easy meeting.
Any questions?
Questions?
Any questions from the council? No. Kathy, on the flow issue, I don't want to go into it real deeply, but I just want to ask, was there a conversation because the NEP, while we are lagoon-wide, from driving that message, should we be driving that message from the state level, FDEP, an agency, assisting an agency to actually push that type of situation? Because I think we're not as large to be able to manage that, but I'll be talking to Dwayne on that later on. But
yeah, and I think it was just our just whether we wanted to support it or not. I think that was all that we really kind of decided, that we really needed more information. We wanted to keep it on the table, but at this time we weren't ready to support a full-blown, project or not support it.
okay, yeah, because whatever does come will be very costly, and a whole lot more information is going to have to come.
Exactly.
So I appreciate the management board's position. All right.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Thank you. And next is the STEM Advisory Committee, Dr. Jacoby. Welcome back.
So the STEM Advisory Committee met with the management board, and we agreed on the flushing issue that's going to take some thought. It's a big, complex, hard to predict the outcomes from sort of attempt, but it's definitely worth considering. We've been spending some time on the CCMP trying to give some input, and so we're looking forward to seeing that move forward, and then also having input into the risk-based vulnerability assessment, which is a look to the future, and we look forward to wrapping up phase 1 and moving on to phase 2, which is where the priorities get set. So that's been our focus.
Okay, any questions? No, we're moving right along. Thank you, Doctor. Next is Citizens Advisory Committee. Frank?
Mr. Chair, Frank Catino sends his regrets. He's at the ICAST conference over in Orlando. It's one of the biggest fishing conferences in the United States.
We knew Frank was fishing.
And so Kathy will kind of update you later in the agenda where the CAC has been working.
Okay, thank you. All right, presentations on water quality reports. Dr. Jacoby's right back up. Get your exercise today. You're going to...
Not sure there'll be quite as many people.
Welcome back.
Thank you. So what I wanted to do today, because it's been a little while, is to kind of walk you through what we've been seeing in this northern part of the lagoon. Come on, Elmo, cooperate. Okay.
You remember?
So the take-home message from this really is simply that we'll look at two places. One is up in Banana River Lagoon, and these are a couple of our continuous monitoring stations, and the other one's down at Vero. So the kind of the two extremes of this reach of the lagoon. We have lost some continuous monitoring stations during the hurricanes, and those are coming back online as soon as they can get them up and running again. So first of all, temperatures, and what I'll be doing is, again, showing you sort of the Vero data, and then go up to the Banana River Lagoon. And remind me if or take a look if I don't remember to mention it, but the scales do change a bit. And that's,
can you center that a little bit better so we can see what, okay, we're not gonna get the, okay. Just looking for the numbers on there, that's fine.
yeah, well, the numbers I'll tell you what the numbers
Okay.
are. So we'll just look mostly at the pattern regardless. So this is temperature, and temperatures, this runs from April 2017 to just a few days ago when I pulled these data. So temperatures were up in the mid 30 degrees centigrade or around 90 degrees Fahrenheit during the last summer. They dropped down in January, and you can see it got down to just below 12 degrees or 54 degrees Fahrenheit. And then it has come up again, you know, as we get summer. And temperature is a driver for a lot of the processes that are important in the lagoon, so it's something we track. In Banana River Lagoon, a similar pattern, up to around 30 degrees centigrade. In the summer, down, it got a little cooler, so it's down below 10 in the winter, and it's come back up, but it hasn't gotten quite as warm yet there. Salinity is another thing we track. This is Vero, and you would expect salinities in Vero to be a little different than they would be in Banana, and you'll see that they are. And so you can see here that salinities have periods of time. This is sort of September, October 2017 when there was a dip in salinity. It goes back up again. 35 is seawater, so this is down in the sort of tens and teens. And then it came down again in May, and we all know what May brought to the area. So. In Banana River Lagoon, it's a slightly different pattern. Again, it was up in the 30 range, dropped in September and October last year, and then pretty much has stayed down in the lower range of 20 or so. And so that gives you some idea of the variability. Salinity is something we can regard as a conservative tracer, so it's not churning like the nutrients are with the phytoplankton and things. And so that gives you some handle on what we'll call residence time for today. And it's those variations in residence time that both make the lagoon diverse and make certain parts of it very vulnerable and sensitive to things like inputs of nutrients. Gave way. There we go. These are chlorophyll values, and chlorophyll is the thing that we use to track phytoplankton. It's a measure of biomass of phytoplankton, and it relates to how many phytoplankton there are. And it's also an important indicator of how light transmits through the system. So down at Vero, you can see that there were peaks. This is September last year, and here we have one in January and February, which reached up to 100. Now these, we report a couple different kinds of chlorophyll measurements. These are field measurements. They're using a fluorescence approach. So they don't equate directly to the lab numbers that you may get in some of the other kinds of reports. And then recently, there have been some peaks in chlorophyll, sort of up in the 50 range. Banana River Lagoon, and again, you can see there's a different pattern here. So the scales change. So that scale, the last scale went to 100. This scale is going to 400. So that's a fourfold difference. And you can see that there were some peaks up through about November 2017, and then there was a sort of a rise, and we basically, in Banana River Lagoon, have stayed above 100 micrograms chlorophyll per liter since late last year. And so that's the brown tide. Initially, it was predominantly brown tide. It's more mixed now, but it's still there, particularly in the central and northern parts of Banana River Lagoon. So one of the reasons that we worry about chlorophyll is because these phytoplankton both produce oxygen as a byproduct of photosynthesis and use oxygen at night, and particularly if the bloom crashes, as we say. And then the phytoplankton degrade. The bacteria are consuming the phytoplankton. They use oxygen as they do that. And it's those oxygen dips that we worry about for things like fish and other things. So 2 micrograms or 2 milligrams per liter is sort of the threshold where we expect fish and other organisms to be struggling. And so we track the oxygen levels, and you can see in Vero, they were pretty much up around, this is 6, and they rose up in the winter, and that's because cold water holds more oxygen than warm water, so you'd expect to see that. Then they'd come back down again, but they're still up in the range of 6. Banana River Lagoon sort of had the period in the summer of last year in 6, again rose up in the winter up to around 10 and has come back down. But what you can see from sort of April and through recently are dips, and that's 2, that line is 2. So there are more dips down 2 or below 2. And that's been the motivation for what started as weekly and have now converted to monthly phone calls, daily releases of information from the DEP, and a range of efforts to try and stay on top of what conditions are like, where we are, and how can we respond to any events that might occur, such as we had in 2016 with the fish kill. Thus far, we haven't seen any massive fish kills, which has been good. When we have had dips of DO when it gets cloudy, and the phytoplankton don't photosynthesize as rapidly, so the oxygen levels tend to fall, then we've also had a front usually come through. And just that amount of mixing brings oxygen levels back up. So far, so good. Another reason we follow chlorophyll is because it alters the light regime. And the light regime is critical for seagrasses. Seagrasses need a lot of light, and so they're one of the first things to respond when conditions get dark. You've seen this before. These are the acres of seagrass in the lagoon, in the St. John's portion of the lagoon, mapped in various years. This is the 2011 super bloom, as we called it, and the drop in seagrasses. And then the seagrasses attempted to come back in the intervening years. The mapping data for 2017 is just being vetted now, and we should have that shortly. But transects, so one of the other things that we do besides mapping, and South Florida does this, a similar sort of exercise, is people do transects from shore and look how far out the seagrasses go, so the length of that transect, and that correlates really well with the acres that are mapped. And so we use that as a predictor of what acres will look like. And you can see the blue line is the transect length, and you can see that in 2016 and 17, it's shorter than it was. And so we think we're looking at a decrease in acres of seagrass in the 2017 maps. So. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Council, any questions? Okay, moving right along. Thank you. All right, next item is Diane Hughes from Martin County. Good morning.
Good morning. Here to give you your water quality conditions update in the southern end of the system, and I just wanted to give you a little bit of background of how we got to where we are in the St. Lucie estuary today. For the month of May, we had over 25 inches of rain. We started receiving basin flows from the C-44 around May 15th. We started receiving lake flows on June 2nd. And as you know, Corps halted the lake flows for us on June 30th, and they're supposed to start up again today. We did check. They are only right now releasing from the canal, so they haven't opened the lake yet, but right now they're releasing about 1,000 CFS from the canal. And there was an algae bloom that we knew about on June 28th that covered about 90% of the lake. Now, visually, it appears that the discharges, when they stopped the discharges, that it assisted in reducing the blooms within the estuary. But I'm going to show you some drone footage later that became apparent to us that, well, the algae is still really hanging on. Our surface salinities, in the next slide, are staying around 6 parts per thousand, so it's still fresh enough for the algae at the surface to stay alive and flourish. These numbers are a little bit different right now today. Our current conditions, because I prepared this yesterday, we're at 14.49 feet. As you can see, we were roughly the same, about a little bit lower a week ago. A year ago, we were at only 12.46, so we're a lot higher than we were a year ago. This morning, they're releasing about 3,900 CFS out is coming into the lake still, and this 136 is this morning. We're at 1,298 CFS is finally leaving the lake. As I said, our bottom salinities have come up to 25, but those surface salinities are still problematic for us. We have a lot of stratification in our system. And our temperatures are between 86 and 89 degrees Fahrenheit, which is still lower than we had in 2016. We were on 91 degrees in 2016 when we had the algae bloom that year. This is something that we look at daily. We monitor this page daily. It tells us the lake elevation, the flows, where everything is going in the system. There's the web page up at the top of there. You can go there every day and it'll tell you what the flows are like in the system. And that's what we monitor on a daily basis. This is just a visual for you so that you can see what the bloom looked like on June 28th and what we were prepared to be seen coming our way. What we're currently doing, as I said, we're monitoring the water quality conditions. We're working closely with the Army Corps and the Water Management District to be up to date on hydrological conditions and discharges. We're certainly advocating for pulse discharges and relief from discharges. We did, what was it, 2-3 weeks ago when we requested no discharges, and the Corps honored that request at the time. We understand that as the lake goes up, they're going to have to send the discharges to us. We understand that. And we're communicating with our residents and leadership within the county to make sure that everyone knows what's occurring. This was a view from the C-44 canal at the 96th Street Bridge. That's about a mile away from the locks, west of the locks, near where I live. This was Monday morning. I took another picture this morning. That's a little bit more green this morning. As you know, the governor has issued a state of emergency, and that mobilizes resources and reduces and eliminates obstacles for relief from this crisis and permitting. It's easier to contract for us. The declaration also increased the amount of staff to do the water testing from FWC and from DEP. It provides assistance to businesses impacted by the algal blooms, and it allows the Water Management District to find other areas for storage. It allows them to deviate from their regular regulation schedules. They're storing more in the Kissimmee chain of lakes right now, and they're trying to find areas in the southern end of the system where they can push the water out for more storage. And it now mobilizes the health department to provide signage to warn the public about algae blooms, which we're grateful for. We have contracted with a company to do some drone survey for us, and I'm going to show you some of that footage here shortly. We are reporting blooms to DEP for testing, and we have made arrangements with Harbor Branch to, if and when we request from them, to come down and do some additional testing if we need be. And Drew, as you know, you guys have issued an intent to negotiate for harmful algal bloom management services, although it's non-chemical and non-biological, so only mechanical treatment would be allowed to remove the blooms. For us, in our southern end of the system, the Water Resources Development Act was revised to include the EA reservoir. We were grateful to get that in. The House's word bill also includes a provision to review the Lake Okeechobee regulation schedule. We're pretty excited to be involved in that and see how we might be able to change the regulation schedule so there's less impacts to the St. Lucie and Caloosahatchee estuaries. Senator Rubio's amendments would ensure that any Lake Okeechobee discharges occur in a pulse manner. That helps us with allowing salinities to come back and reducing the algae blooms, unless there's threat to the integrity of the Herbert Hoover Dike. His second amendment reasserts the original intention for the Everglades restoration efforts to redirect Lake Okeechobee discharges towards the central Everglades, where we would like it to go. And then these are all links to information that we provide on our website and to our residents, so they know where to go to get information so that we keep them up to date and they're aware of what's going on within the system. That's all I have for you today. Any questions?
Any questions from council? All right.
I do want to show you.
Do you want to show the drone footage or something?
And it's a long video, but I'm just going to kind of skip through it. So this is the S80 structure and the algae that's been sitting behind the lock structure for the past 12 days, building up and growing. Pretty much looks like this, the whole canal along as you're flying the system. That's what's coming our way right now. This is now heading east. So it's after the locks. This is past the locks. Oh, no, it's not. Almost. This is now in the part of the canal that's past the locks. So you can see pretty much from bank to bank, there's algae. Well, I just wanted to give you an idea, so it skipped me out of there. But if you'd like that footage, I can provide that footage available to you via FTP. Okay? Thank you.
Yeah, if you could distribute it to all of us, it'd be great, or through
Okay, great.
Kathy or whoever. Okay. Well, that news just gave us all, agita.
It's coming at us.
Yeah, okay. Next is the consent agenda. I just want a clarification. Consent agenda we usually move through. But Carolyn, do I need to specifically call out the appointments for motions or just fall it under one? Okay. All right. Consent agenda is next. Is there any comments or questions on this, or is there a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any comments or questions on the item? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you very much. Councilwoman Denny's, did you want to recognize anybody?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Just a moment of personal privilege here. I'd like to introduce Greg Wilson. If you could stand up, we're going to appoint him to the management board. Greg comes to us from a group that has started within the last year called the Riverside Conservancy in Southeast Volusia that's very proactive in personally helping to support our lagoon and all of our efforts. So it's a great honor that he gets appointed and will be a great asset to us going forward. Congratulations. Thank you for serving.
Thank you. And thank you for introducing him to us. Great credentials. All right, next item will be new business. This will be Dwayne and the legislative positions.
Kathy, could you advance to those slides for me? Each year since we've started, we've had a single legislative position statement that was a combination of both federal and state, typically general. In consideration of where we are this year with an election coming up and the fact so much is moving federally and at the state level, I have separated these into a state legislative position as well as a federal. And let's start with And this is just the pertinent information. The background information is similar. The back page, we have created a little sense of urgency with some photos of the multiple blooms. We have every color of the rainbow this year between what was happening in Banana River, but we feel that if we're going to be talking about funding, you know, having this gorgeous picture of a sunset may not actually, you know, suggest how urgently we need to continue to move funding. So you'll notice those general differences. But the substantive differences, and if you have edits, Kathy's ready to do them here. For the federal, this is very similar to last year. We're requesting expanded and accelerated funding for Everglades restoration. And the one change is an addition, you know, we have been in a position of continued funding for NEPs. We've had really strong federal support, over 70 House members, both sides of the aisle, over 25 senators have signed letters going over to their appropriation chairs to support the program. But there is a constant drone up there about terminating the National Estuary Program. So I don't want to leave any illusion to you all that, you know, we can sit back. We need to continue to fight for federal funding and continuation of this program in the EPA. So we discussed this a bit last meeting with Commissioner Smith's recommendation to, you know, let's ask for a little bit more. You know, we'll be happy to get level funding, but, you know, we're in a position right now of change. And so what I'm asking is for you to give me the authority to go up to DC and say, you know, we're looking for $1 million for each NEP, which would be bringing from $600,000 to $1 million base funding. All the NEPs are in our exact same boat. We just simply do not have enough federal funding to do all the things that we need to do, even those specific things under Clean Water Act. So if you all are comfortable with the language of this federal request, and by the way, we keep this general because the details, you know, we were thinking about some of the water management district specific positions. And, you know, we've got Senator Rubio's got amendments going. We've got WRDA. You know, it's kind of hard to get specific because it changes so rapidly. And I work with DEP, the water management districts. If something specific happens, this gives me enough general guidance to go to the specifics verbally if I'm in DC doing briefings. So open that up for some discussion and request a motion if you're comfortable to adopt this. We can always revise it. We were almost going to put this on the August agenda, and I've been advised by multiple individuals that it'd be good to have this now because there's so much going on federally and at the state level to just solidify a position for council.
Mr. Chair, I would like to make a motion to approve a call for additional funding.
Discussion.
Discussion, please.
So the specifics for the second bullet, and I don't know whether they need to be in here or not, but maybe you need some guidance. SERP funding should be at $200 million a year recurring out of the federal government. It's more than that at the state, but we need to get that at the federal level. And we need to authorize WRDA 2018 with the EAA amendment, PACR, post-authorization change report as part of it. So Water Resources Development Act needs to be amended to get the EAA reservoir as part of SEP and passed. So those two specifics. Brandon, is that where you all are? Yeah. So.
And those are not too specific. I mean, I was hoping that we would have that recommendation because I wasn't quite sure of the actual wording. So if, you know,
I would be amenable
Mr. Chair,
to
I think that's
make those
appropriate.
additions.
So we have an amended motion. Does the seconder agree? Any other comments from council? I just want to add in that, you know, our friends to the north were very successful in a half-cent sales tax or a sales tax referendum, which is providing opportunity for match funds for greater efficiency in getting things done. St. Lucie County is now moving forward with a referendum for a half-cent sales tax, which would provide as much as $18 million a year for the entities within the county, all of which we've focused on are all capital projects, 3/4 of them are all going to benefit in some way our rivers, whether it's roads, drainage, the sidewalks aside, but the ability to clean our waterways. So that money can be expanded exponentially with matches. So we want to take our local effort. We have seen from our public an outcry, do something now. So we're trying to move that forward. So I think that'll be helpful, and I appreciate the motion to move this forward. So.
Great, thank you. And just as a point of information, I will, as we did with Brevard County's half-cent, using our service to help the county move that, half-cent sales tax forward with it, technical assistance is needed, which is part of what we do with our local partners. And so I've talked to the commissioner, and they've got a campaign they're getting ready to roll up, and so we will support as best we can that effort.
And to that point, the CCMP, just so as we move forward, the CCMP will actually give a guideline so to help St. Lucie County focus on the appropriate projects that will return the investment sooner than later. So that's where I think we can coordinate these types of efforts, and so that CCMP, when complete, will give St. Lucie County the idea and the opportunity to focus the projects that will best help the lagoon. So we have a motion and a second. Any other comments from the council? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously.
Okay, the second is the Florida Legislative Position Statement. We have added a little detail only because of our past experiences of, really needing to educate our state elected officials and their staffs about the relationship of the IRL Council with the interlocal agreement. We all know that, at times we've had to kind of insert funding for our agencies, DEP in particular, during the process. And so we're a little more explicit, in this one than we have been in the past. So the first bullet is to continue state funding for the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program through our partner state agencies at St. John's, South Florida, and the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. And then it talks about, continued annual funding pursuant to the interlocal agreement. And the second is almost exactly like we had last year. Expand state funding allocations for competitive local cost share projects for restoration. And we have some priorities here that we, have taken from dialogue over the last couple sessions and some legislative positions about this combination of wastewater, septic to sewer, stormwater, kind of the broader look of restoration, which is also consistent with what you will see in this our old CCMP and the proposed revisions. And so this is the language, and all of the support language is similar in both of these documents to this. So I'll open that up for discussion. Any edits, changes, recommendations?
Comments from the council? Hearing none, I will just simply reiterate my comments regarding the half-cent sales tax for St. Lucie County, and that this opportunity will give us a better chance to expand our dollars to do better projects. So, there are no other comments. Is there a motion to move this legislative item forward? So move. We have a motion and a second. Any comments or questions on the item? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. And one thing I will ask of all of you, we have a special meeting in August 24th, and then we meet again in October. And so within each of your agencies and counties, if we need to tweak these along the way, we need to do so. Or we just need to have, if there's some specifics. I've had really good working relationships with each of your organizations on specific issues. But there's going to be a lot of flux with this election year, and so I hope that we are in good communication, and I will let you know ahead of time when I'm going to Washington or Tallahassee to make sure that I have the appropriate positions for you all that are consistent with what we've just passed. So thank you.
Dwayne, if I could ask the council, in previous years we've had individual counties provide a letter of support for the NEP. I don't know if it makes much of a difference, but because we all sit on this NEP, but if our councils are in agreement that these are things that we want as representatives of our county, is that something we want to do again? Okay.
Can you send a document that we'll have approved?
Okay.
Yeah, we'll clean up the documents, send them out, and then you can, work accordingly from there. One thing I will ask, though, some of you give me pretty good access to staff, including lobby staff. Some of you, we haven't had that tight connection. When I'm in Tallahassee, it's always a little embarrassing for me to run into one of your lobbyists, and they go, "We didn't know you were here," or "I wish you were with us when we were briefing, somebody." And so let's make sure those lines of communication are open and active, so I don't get crosswise with any of you, and that we're working collectively where we have full agreement, so we've got a common message.
All right, thank you. All right, moving on to old business. Thank you for the
Kathy, you want to go ahead and
adjustment.
pop me up?
Under old business, we have the update on the enhanced circulation flow, as we alluded to earlier.
I'm going to work through this presentation quickly, knowing that, we're going to be at a point and we'll be talking about this further. But I wanted to just show you, this is one of 2 3-ring binders I have about circulation. And so this is not a new discussion for the Indian River Lagoon, nor is it for many estuaries that are lagoon-type estuaries. And last meeting, you asked me to bring back kind of a, where are we now? What's the status? What's this general feeling out there about moving forward, and what's a recommendation for next steps? So I wanted to remind everybody why this is a system that's so vulnerable. And it's not just because we have a lagoonal system with just a few inlets, and this slide shows it best. There's no estuary in the nation that is this narrow, this shallow, with this kind of a watershed, spanning subtropical, tropical, temperate, and a lot of times we forget, including me, that the nature of how narrow we are, and that the landform activities and the land uses really do impact certain sections of this lagoon prominently. Very different from, let's say, Albemarle Pamlico. I was just up with the EPA visiting them, where you got a Barrow Island, they're on septic, but you have this massive open waters. It's 10 times our surface area. So we are more vulnerable and more sensitive to nutrients and inputs, and the restricted nature of our ocean connections, just support that vulnerability. And we have breaches. And so when we talk about inlets, we talk about, this connection to the ocean. I think we need to remember that those 5 inlets, and of course, Port Canaveral, is not a true inlet. It's a very managed system for operations. They are all restricted inlets, but inlets have come and gone historically over time. And I wanted to show you the Summerhaven breach that occurred back in Matthew 2016. I haven't shown this to you all, but I actually have aerial drone footage a couple days after this. Nobody could have predicted the place that this happened. And in fact, there were talks about maybe where they would expand. And so when you hear about, let's model vulnerabilities for a breach and think about where that vulnerability might be as it relates to ocean circulation, Mother Nature decides that, and as good as the models are, if you're 100 feet off, if you just built an inlet, and 2 years later, it breaches 100 feet to the south of that inlet, I mean, that is always a risk. There is no guarantee to siting these, thinking that somehow you're going to be able to predict how a storm surge, or wave surge is going to hit. And we have had surges, so we've come over the top in Mosquito Lagoon just in the last 10 years. So this is a natural feature. One other point to this is that after Sandy, and I was up in New York in Sandy, there were multiple breaches on Fire Island, one of which was left open in the Fire Island wilderness area, and that breach has had significant changes to water quality, also improvements, but they are not microtidal. We are a microtidal system, and so these small breaches really don't deliver much flushing as a standalone item. They do make change, though, and so we'll talk about that in a minute. So this slide, I just wanted to let everybody know, because it comes up all the time about, we want it to be a natural system. This is a human-dominated ecosystem where changes to flushing have begun, decades and decades ago, one of the most prominent impacts to natural flow internally is up at Kennedy Space Center along Banana Creek. And while this top map is not really easy to see, this is a map of Happy Creek Lodge back in the, I think it's 50s, circa 1950. But we had full connection between Indian River Lagoon to the west and the head of the Banana River. And if you talk to Laura Lee Thompson, whose family actually, Laura Lee actually used to summer there as a kid, this was a phenomenally productive area for bird shooting, fishing, and in fact, now if you look below, a lot of those connections between Indian River Lagoon and Banana River Lagoon were dredge and filled in the early 60s for our, human space race. And so it's a human-dominated system. And right up at that coastal edge, if you look at that geology, some of those, sand ridges show that historically that used to be an overwash area. So at times the ocean would express at that point of the Barrier Island. And we've got numerous causeways. We'll talk in a minute, when I finish up about where we stand on 528. But these causeways have caused not just compartmentalization, but we already have a long residence time as a lagoon, and causeways have increased that residence time. And in areas like the Banana River, where they're fairly close together with high density, including high density septic tanks and inputs from land use, those areas are particularly vulnerable to having water quality changes. And we see this really clearly in 2016 and 2018. The data that Dr. Jacoby showed you, these are the satellite images, and you can see how red, the hot areas of red and orange show the high chlorophyll A counts, and so that's where that brown tide bloom was. And so we have been really blooming almost nonstop in Banana River through 2000, since the beginning of 2018. But it kind of shows how this spatial relationship is with slow flow. But I want to caution everybody that it doesn't mean that's the only place we're having algal blooms. We've had blooms just off of Sebastian Inlet just this year of dinoflagellates. And so we are all vulnerable to blooms when conditions get right. When nutrients are high, we are more vulnerable because we can fuel those blooms, but we do have these hot spots. And so part of the discussion over the last year or two and beyond was, are there ways to maybe do a pilot study to address the vulnerability with either internal flow improvements or ocean enhanced flow? So I want to focus just on the ocean enhanced first. There's really only three general ways to engineer this. Either a new inlet has its opportunities and challenges, expanding existing inlets, and we know they aren't exactly where we need them. And if you know your inlets, and I know Commissioner Zadofsky knows Fort Pierce Inlet, that's the largest inlet we have. And those of you who know it know how that water exchanges. It's the least restrictive, but it is still a restrictive inlet. And it is different than Sebastian and some of the smaller inlets. So with inlets, actually size does matter, but there are both advantages and vulnerabilities when you build really large, wide, deep inlets, both for the mainland exposure and storm surge, but also just operation, maintenance, and infrastructure, including bridges.
And Dwayne, there's the cost of sand renourishment just about every year. So. And
the sand renourishment issue should not be, I think, undervalued or underplayed. That, as soon as you put an engineered structure like an inlet, then you are going to have downstream sand management requirements that will be forever. And it's something to take into consideration as we move forward in our deliberations about opportunities. And then there's a number of engineered one-way solutions, weirs and pumps. I think you have seen in previous, and I'll show you again, the Florida Tech idea about a weir. We saw a pilot project idea from St. Johns River Water Management District about pumping. There are lots of potential engineered structures, but they are all site-specific. So it's not like, well, let's just go do a weir and we'll do it somewhere. You need to have the location, and then you're going to design and engineer to the needs and opportunities and constraints of the location. By the way, I probably should have done this in the beginning, but I am not an engineer and I am not an expert in this. And so what I am telling you is what I've gleaned from those folks, and we've got a lot of really good, smart people throughout the watershed who are experts that we can bring in. St. John's River Water Management District has done a really excellent job of moving through a three-phase process to identify kind of where are the opportunities, what does the literature look like, and the last presentation you saw was the idea of at least one pilot project, but it gives us some baseline data to begin to move to wherever we move on this next step. And so we have a lot of information that we can bring to that next level of discussion. And most of the, and this is just a few, most of the site locations have been kind of broadly based. You know, let's look at where they're close, where it might be easy. I can tell you this, none of these are easy, and none of them are quick, and none of these locations would happen overnight. But these are a list of 7 that St. John's looked at that were of primary, consideration. And I'm going to propose today, and this is just how I see it and how I see it as I hear it from our engineers and our modelers. 3 sites have a tendency to come up to discussion as the logical places if the outcome is to improve that Banana River that is most impacted by poor water quality over long periods of time. And the more north you go in Banana River, the larger the area that you will see that north-south flushing, which means, you're coming up into that head of NASA Kennedy Space Center. We have had long conversations, and you've seen proposals about Port Canaveral, and if there's specific questions about that, Bob Musser's in the room, and he can represent the port. But there are a lot of operational and safety issues that are difficult, but that is still one of the areas that we're looking at. And then the third is right by Canaveral Air Force Base, southern Cocoa Beach. The challenge of all of these is that they are all on federal lands, which means you're going to need a federal partner to be willing to move forward with us, and I mean us and the collective us, the state of Florida, if we move forward on this. The case study from Florida Tech was a weir, at the locks. There is a paper that I can supply to you if you want more detail. Here's the bottom line. So inlets kind of ebb and flow. They don't really generate what I would call a net flow change, although they are important depending on where they're located and sized. So there's no question that you're going to get increased quality of water on an incoming tide. And if you know Sebastian Inlet, almost all the inlets on the outgoing, you'll see them become, more estuarine-like. And then the weir structure and the pumping, they each have abilities to deliver either greater volumes of water, greater or lesser capabilities of control, and that is a design engineering consideration based on location. And, I'm asked often, do you have any examples? And there are a lot of examples where these have succeeded. I hear a lot that there are examples where they have failed, especially over in Europe. My take on this personally is if you get the design and engineering and the location, this is doable if, and this is an important if you know what the outcome is. What are you managing for? So if you're thinking that we can do this to stop algal blooms, you're probably over-anticipating a benefit, but improving symptoms and decreasing vulnerability, decreasing that residence time, all of those outcomes need to be considered in the design engineering features. Destin Harbor put a pump in its harbor. It's way smaller in scale. I have not talked to the Destin Harbor folks, but I pulled this off their website just to give you an idea that the pump station has been done on a smaller scale. There are some operational costs on that small scale. And I want to leave any illusions to anybody who's watching that those costs would be ours, because we'd be looking at substantial greater volumes to see improvement. But, this idea of pumping water is being done at power plants all over the place. And so there are examples of where this has been done at commercial scale. So I'm going to finish really quickly with just what I hear. And what we hear from our management conference and STEM AC, because we've had multiple meetings where we've addressed this, and Kathy LaMartina mentioned it, but when we polled by hand the combined management board and STEM AC this week, I would say around 80%, maybe more, would like to keep this in consideration. And we have a few that would dig an inlet tomorrow, and a few that would never want to see it ever. And so for the most part, we are in agreement in your advisory committees that we need to continue to look at this. So the common arguments against are it's symptomatic, not root cause. That we have infrastructure that, depending on its location, could be infrastructure at risk. So in a hurricane, you may have capital exposure to risk. There are also infrastructures at risk. I've talked to the city of Satellite Beach, who are already having problems with their stormwater invert elevations. Over the last about 50, 60 years, we're up 5 to 6 inches in the lagoon, and they're already seeing some restriction to their drainage flow to the lagoon on stormwater. So if we do something that stages that water up, the timing of that would matter, because it may back into some of that existing infrastructure, a consideration that we have to consider. There's a big concern among some that this distracts from the root cause needs, which is reduced nutrients and pollutants. There are some that are worried about altering biological diversity, some that are just worried that we can't get enough flow to make a difference, and especially what is that flow rate against what your expectation for outcome would be. There's always the cost issue with this. If you remember the St. John's study, we were in the $10 million range for that pipe and pump proposal. And then lastly, it's not a short-term solution, and this is something we all need to at least remember. The permitting on this is going to be lengthy. The design and engineering is going to be complicated. We need to have a multidisciplinary team in place. But if we're going to move forward, we probably should start thinking about that earlier than later because of the long timeline. But very often, I know all of you have had phone calls saying, well, let's just drop a new inlet. None of that happens fast, so this is not a quick fix. On the arguments for, and there's a number that are, I think, really arguments that need to be considered. Increasing water flow and decreasing that residence time. There's a good evidence in the literature to suggest that you would see some benefits because some of these blooming species like static water. Doesn't mean they won't bloom, but it's something to consider. And we know that increasing that flow will help things like dissolved oxygen, and in fact we have those impediments to flow right now because of causeways. Improvement to water clarity and quality, improvement to seagrasses, those reductions in vulnerability of DO and fish mortality, reducing vulnerability to algal blooms. We hear all of those, including managing temperature, salinity, pH, and I threw in aragonite saturation because that's the big issue for shellfish. All of that depends on how this is engineered, and I will caution you as a biologist that the response is going to be hard to predict. And so how this system biologically responds is a risk. Could be a benefit, but it's always a risk. And those risks we just need to know going in at least where that might be. So I'll just suggest one, and it's the opposite of what we're seeing down south with Lake O. So when you take fresh water, you move it into a salinity gradient, we see things happening that we might not have predicted if we hadn't been watching it. When we take seawater and bring it into a more brackish or sometimes more saline system, we have really high nutrients. Is there a possibility to go from a brown tide, which is not toxic, to a toxic red tide? And the phycologists and the people who know blooms say that's a risk. We don't know what might bloom as we're shifting to this new regime, so it's something to consider. It is a unique opportunity, and we can't argue this, that we could validate our models. So changing flow and doing the kind of work that oceanographers and hydrologists do will help us with modeling. And it could provide a science-based opportunity to help us make decisions in a breach. So I'm going to conclude just this way. You know, we are continuing to talk with DOT on 528. You know, we are in a partner project that was funded, you know, 75% by Port Canaveral. We're talking to DOD. We have 10 scenarios that have just come in to look at this causeway abutment constriction, and you'll see varying stories about this in the literature. This is the most recent peer-reviewed publication that talks about causeways and constricted flow. And what we're seeing in the models, and I mean we, it's really Bob Musser and I talking to Dr. Gary Zarillo, is that you will see improvement to flow if we configure our causeways properly. And so we have 10 scenarios, which I'll share with you as soon as we get the final report, looking at, you know, if we open up 528, what do you get? If we open up 528 and 520, what do we get? We'll bring that to you, but there's no question we need to continue this discussion with DOT about opening up where we can these causeways to get more internal flow, because these causeways we caused, and so we can mitigate some of that damage. So this is what I need from you, and I'll give you my recommendation. I, as your executive director, and we as an NEP, can't take this to the next step. You know, we don't have the kind of the staff capacity. We can help our partner agencies move it forward, but there is no next step unless we have a local partner, and if we decide federal property, a federal agency willing to explore these opportunities. Because doing another study without at least identifying where that needs to be and where it might be, in my opinion, is kind of a waste of time and money. That we really do need to find out where a coalition of support might be and then do the due diligence against a site that has a partnership. And I don't believe that I am the person who should be going to the federal government and saying, hey, do you want to partner on a project of this scale? This scale is above my staff and my capacity, and so I'm going to be looking kind of back up the ladder about how we do this. And it's really a critical go, no-go threshold. And so my recommendation is maybe, and Drew and I have talked about this, to maybe have that conversation. I'm happy to partner, but this is where we're at now. I don't really see a place for us to take that next unless and until we have, you know, those players in place to say, yeah, we'd like to explore this more on property that I own if it's federal, or it's state property, or it's local property, and that we've got both the Water Management District and the state kind of in the room to have that discussion. So that's all I have for today.
Any questions from council? Drew?
So not a question so much. You know, I do think this is worth exploring, and the reason I get there is because there used to be more overwash and overflow, and we're dealing with a modified system in Banana River. And so I have engaged DOT, which is, I assume they are better engaged now on the causeway discussion. And if not, I need to know, because I can...
Yes, they are, and in fact, they are anxiously awaiting this final report and these models.
Okay. I just need to make sure I get that in my hands so I can make sure leadership at DOT is aware of it. I do think that, so we need the estuary program to help us with the community discussion on a hydrologic enhancement. I'm not sure what we call it. I do not like the word flushing.
Nor do I. But I think we're stuck with it. I mean, talk about a label that is
Ocean
stuck
exchange.
like... Yeah.
Right.
Right.
But, you know, to help with the community discussion, because there's a lot of opinions, you know, on this. But I am certainly, and I don't know, Kurt, how well of a relationship that Brevard County has with the federal entities within the county, but it's something that we can certainly engage in.
Well, I've spoken to Senator Rubio about this subject, and I spoke to Governor Scott about it too, and I'm presuming that he has a real chance of winning in November, and you know, so we can go from there. But we have to get our state people on board.
So I think it is a question of where do we really engage? Is it, you know, NASA and the Cape, or is it Patrick Air Force, the Corps? I'm not sure which is the most important engagement.
My recommendation, because there's so much work already done at St. John's, is to get, you know, St. John's back in the room, the folks who did the technical documentation. I know there was some DEP involvement with that. Make sure Port Canaveral's in the room. Maybe we'll get NASA Kennedy Space. Let's get those three, you know, higher likely sites in the room to see, kind of gauge, you know, before we start to move to try to assemble a engineering and science team. You know, let's kind of gauge, you know, what the level of interest might be on sites, because that may very well be the driver for where we go next. You know, if they say no, never, we're never going to push that forward, you know, it's how long are we going to keep, you know, pushing against, you know, an object that isn't moving? But I do think we should bring them all in the room and have that discussion. And we very much will like and will continue to support. You know, we can get the scientists together, the engineers, get everybody in the room.
I don't disagree that we should get those people in the room, but I can tell you, having dealt with people from like Patrick Air Force Base, they're going to listen to you and they're going to defer. They're going to tell you it's not possible, and they're going to defer to Washington because they'll do whatever Washington tells them to do. And I can just tell you one specific instance that I had. There's a lot of people that like to park to go to the beach by Patrick Air Force Base, and the parking space there is not really a parking lot. And so people pull in and then they have to back out onto A1A. Well, an engineer came to me and said, I got a simple solution that we just have to get permission. He said, I can get all the crushed granite that we need. And he said, we just need permission from Patrick Air Force Base to allow us to do that. And then we can expand that area that people just park on anyway. And so he and I had a meeting with the people at Patrick, and there was a room full of generals and blowers, and they were very nice listening to what we had to say, and they basically said, ain't never going to happen. Unless you can get somebody above us to tell us that it's going to happen, it ain't going to happen. So you can imagine if that's just some stone on a piece of ground, empty ground, that would make the area safer for people. It's going to be tough to get them to say, okay, well, let's just pursue this idea of an inlet through our property.
To enhance or to amplify that thought process, St. Lucie County, with the largest inlet along the East Coast, I would suggest, is going through a request for a renewed GRR, General Review Report, for the jetties themselves. Because of the amount of sand that is being washed off or not being supplemented, you know, with the flow, we're looking at $8–10 million every 4 years, give or take. And then the starvation to the south also is a $20 million number that we've just heard this week. But the GRR has been a 5-year process. We still have 3 more years left on that GRR, and then it expires. It was a 50-year GRR. We had to go to Army Corps for the last 5 years, and we have submitted multiple approaches. We believe that it's an old, you know, it's a former GRR. We just want to extend it. Well, they have changed the rules, and so now we had to create a new project, so we don't have any credit for the previous 47 years going forward. And so we have gone back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And so, you know, we need to be careful about the political will, regardless of who's in there, because if philosophies change, so does the element. There was a time when earmarks used to be what we renourished the beaches on, and no one knew the difference. But today, we have to have local match of 50%, whatever the case. And so, you know, anytime we do something of this magnitude, especially in today's world, you know, political philosophies change in any given election. And so, you know, the costs associated with these things are incredible. But just, you know, again, this is a huge issue, and our landscape is very different today than it has been in previous years. So that's one consideration.
Well, and having said all that, it's just like when you're a kid and you're looking for a prom date. I always believe the prettiest girl is never going to say no unless you say, ask her. And she can't say yes unless you ask her, so we got to start the ask.
Good point.
And just so we're clear from staff, you know, we're currently managing 43 contracts. We're going to bring 16 more on next year. We stand ready to support this. I think we need to be involved in it, but the NEP probably is not in a capacity position to take point on this, but from a technical standpoint and just a labor force standpoint. And so we'll work with Drew, and you know, maybe we can convene. We also work under a management conference, and so while those political discussions may be happening, we need to get our staff partners along the lagoon in the room as well to make sure they know what's, you know, what's on the table. Nobody should be caught off guard by this, and so we'll work with Drew and the water management districts and see where this goes next step. But it's not going to happen overnight either way, but I just wanted you to know that I don't see my time moving this on point being appropriate to what you all need and what the Indian River Lagoon's in its immediacy, but we are happy to support and do everything we can with partners as those leadership partners arise.
There are no further questions from council. Can we go ahead and move on to the next item, which is the CCMP?
I couldn't be more excited or pleased about where we are right now with this CCMP. Let me see if I can get me backspaced. So back in 1989, I know I wrote that document that you see on the slide. You know, we began to look at a process of, you know, management. And so over the course of the last 8 or 9 months, and we really started this a little bit before because we knew it was coming, we have been looking at the 2008 current update that we're working on, considering the changes in the lagoon, and then we have before you today a draft, and I'm saying this, it's a draft copy of where we are, and this was not generated just by myself and our staff. So we've had tremendous work from Tetra Tech as our contractors. We've had tremendous volunteer support from a number of individuals, including EPA Region 4 has weighed in on this early iteration. But we are at that point now, and I'm going to tell you what I'm going to ask in motion when we get there, is to basically allow you to have us release this to begin that discussion. So this isn't the end, this is actually the very beginning of a process of taking this draft report and moving it forward, hopefully, to a final CCMP draft, which I hope will be adopted, you know, in 2019, and I'll show you my hopeful schedule in a minute. So how did we get here? And there's a couple of points I need to make. You know, we are an authorized, congressionally authorized program in 320 of the Clean Water Act. And so I looked at our old documentation and actually looked at all 27 other CCMPs and said, you know, where are we performing as an organization related to our federal authorization? And these are the 7 mandates within the Clean Water Act, Section 320. And so I wanted to make sure that we were meeting those federal expectations, and you'll see in a little bit, and also EPA's expectations of not just a well-performing National Estuary Program, but an excellent National Estuary Program. And you'll see in some of these, you know, you need to look at monitoring, you need to be tracking, you know, how you're doing on the system. Most important in that mandate, however, is that it's our job to convene a management conference, which we have done over the last 2.5 years, and to take that conference and generate a comprehensive conservation management plan that isn't really the NEPs, it's our management conferences. So each of the cities, each of the counties that you represent, the state agencies, all buy into this plan and its directives. And you know, one of the challenges we have had, and we will continue to have in this review period, is this tendency to want to make it like the Brevard County Save Our Indian River Lagoon plan, where you're listing projects. This operates at a higher level. So think of it like we're setting a highway, you know, with 8 or 10 lanes in a single direction. You know, the lane you pick, once we decide, yeah, where true north is, is really up to each of our partners. So if I am sitting in the city of Vero Beach or the city of Oak Hill, you know, there are going to be priorities within that city that will be consistent with and align with the CCMP that may be very different in scale and scope than Brevard County. So we need to have a document that can be owned at the citizen level all the way up to our federal agencies. And we have attempted to do that. You have seen this, I won't spend any time, but we also used our new mission statement as the baseline for this document. And you're going to see in a minute how that all comes together, and the original goals that you all set forth in the interlocal agreement. And I'm going to ask Tetra Tech to come up here, and Marcy Frick and her team have done an amazing job, and I'm going to admit now that if I'm not their pickiest client, then, you know, they have some pretty picky climates, because I have not kind of said, go do this and bring it back to us. You know, I've been like part of Marcy's team. We have talked repeatedly, and they have been an amazing team to work with, because we have not been easy clients on this, because we have this sense, after 2.5 years of reorganization and that historic perspective, that they as a contractor couldn't really bring to the table. So I believe we have a document that is something to be proud of in draft, and then as people come in and we start to edit it, it's going to be excellent. But Marcy, you and your team have done a great job, so I'm going to turn it over to Marcy.
Thank you, Dwayne. And
Welcome.
you're definitely not the worst client by far. It has been, this has been a great project so far, and we've really enjoyed working with the NEP staff to get the document as far as it is today.
So you're challenging him to be more picky? Is that
No,
what
no,
you're-
no, he's
just checking.
fine, he's
Okay.
fine. He doesn't need to be the worst client. So as Dwayne mentioned, this was not the first document. So we did go back, we looked at the 1996, 2008 CCMPs as the baseline. These are the actions that are in those 2008 CCMP. We started with that. We looked at which ones still apply to the conditions in the lagoon today, because a lot has changed in the system in the last 10 years. Some items we realized we didn't need, or we needed to kind of reorganize. Some items, like you can see in the middle here, impounded marshes was removed in 2008, but we thought that was going to be a key element to help restore some things, so we brought that back in. So we started here to come up with the current plan. So there are major changes in the document that's before you. As I mentioned just a minute ago, you know, the biggest one is a lot has changed in the last 10 years. The lagoon really needs to be restored, and we've shifted that focus back to what is needed to get that restoration really kicked up a notch. As Dwayne was mentioning, we tried to expand the CCMP to match that vision, mission, promise, and goals, and you'll see that the actions are all divided up into one lagoon, one community, one voice. So we're trying to follow that framework you all have established. Also, as Dwayne mentioned, we are trying to make sure we check the boxes on everything the NEP needs to do as part of the Clean Water Act requirements, as well as the EPA program performance measures for an excellent NEP to make sure that we are meeting all those requirements. We have created a vital signs wheel. Matt will actually show that in a minute. It's a really great graphic. We took the concept from Puget Sound, and it's a great way to kind of summarize how we have structured everything, and those vital signs are going to be the key elements that we want to track for IRL restoration, not only the water quality and habitat restoration, but ensuring our community is as sustainable as it can be. We have a whole section, and Dwayne will talk about this in more detail in a little bit, on the specific NEP deliverables that are going to come out over the next 10 years as a part of this new CCMP. I had presented, I think your meeting before last, we had kicked off collecting projects. This will be the first time the CCMP will also include a detailed list of projects that all the local stakeholders are thinking are needed to move restoration forward. And we're hoping that having this more detailed document in combination with those projects will really help bring some more funding to the IRL. So this is the latest and greatest summary of the projects we've received to date. Since I talked with you all, in addition to reaching out to the cities, counties, and towns, we've reached out to the special districts, military installations, federal and state agencies, universities, research facilities. The STEM Advisory Committee gave us a lot of good feedback on who we should reach out to. So to date, we have 495 projects. Most of those are in the stormwater category. We have some in the groundwater / wastewater, so this is septic system upgrades to nutrient removal systems, connections to the wastewater system, and then upgrading wastewater treatment for more nutrient removal. We also have muck removal within the lagoon itself, as well as the major tributaries and canals, habitat restoration within the lagoon and around the shores, education outreach, and monitoring and research. So for these 495 projects, we have some costs and some nutrient reductions. Not everyone gave us information, so the details here are actually on the low end of both the costs and the benefits. The total cost, we asked for everything: land acquisition, design and engineering, permitting, construction, as well as O&M. So this total cost is the total cost of all of that, and if there were O&M costs, it's 10 years of O&M, since this is a 10-year plan. So for those that gave us dollars, it is $1.3 billion. I do want to point out that the stormwater includes the large-scale projects that St. Johns River Water Management District identified in their study. And then in terms of reductions for where we got information, it's about 1.8 million pounds of nitrogen reductions and about 302,000 pounds of phosphorus reductions. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt.
Thank you. So this is the vital sign wheel that Marcy was alluding to, and this was adapted from the Puget Sound CCMP, and early on Dwayne had reviewed that CCMP and recognized that that vital sign wheel was a nice depiction of the CCMP in general, and he wanted to adapt it to our mission. So as you can see, around the outside of the wheel are all of the vital signs or actions that we're going to take in the CCMP action plan, and they're aligned with the One Lagoon, One Community, and One Voice mission. So up on the top you have the One Lagoon, on the right the Healthy Communities, which is One Community, on the left at the bottom is the One Voice, where the lagoon will communicate, collaborate, coordinate all these data projects within the lagoon. So each vital sign or action was addressed in the CCMP action plan, and we dealt with each action or vital sign in the same format. So there's the category, and then there's the action, and the R is what we're going to restore, what we're going to remove, and then the issue summary. We try to keep these very brief. Some of these are complex issues, but we describe each issue in the CCMP action plan. The strategies that we're going to use, using those R's and drilling down more into those strategies. And then the action plan outputs is probably the biggest thing we wanted the management conference to look at within the CCMP. And we formed a table for those action plan outputs, and it gives the recommendation, the intent, the lead agency and the partner agencies, the funding source, and the role of the IRL-NEP. And really what we're asking the management conference to do is they are those lead and partner agencies. So we asked them to make sure that they took a look at this table to make sure that their agency was properly recognized and referenced in this table. If there was something that they wanted added, that they would make comments to add. If there was something that we thought was needed to be changed, that they need to make comments to make those changes. So we stressed that was an important thing for them to look at. So in the action plan, we looked at outcomes: short-term, medium-term, and long-term, and then barriers to success. Oftentimes it's money, as we keep talking about here in this forum. So, and then there's citations, and the management conference was a great help in developing the library of citations so we could review and help us prepare that CCMP. One of the things we wanted to do in the CCMP is try and give kind of a ranking structure to each of these vital signs. So in the top left corner of each action, there's going to be a little thermometer. And we're going to do a SurveyMonkey poll to have everybody rank each of these vital signs, each of these actions, with accordance to the criteria you see there. Level 1 being critical, level 2 serious, level 3 being undetermined. It may be critical, maybe serious, or it may be 4, it may be stable, and we just don't know. So we need to look at the criteria that you see here for each of these levels and make sure that the language fits with what we want to do, and make sure, especially, it's a little easier with the One Lagoon vital signs. It's a little harder with the One Community and One Voice vital signs to make these fit. So we want to make sure that the language is good for each of those vital signs. And then what we'll do in the CCMP is have the temperature gauge match the level based on the assessment. Okay, with that, I'll hand it back to you.
So one comment on the levels of concern. We spent a lot of time on that. It's not easy to kind of rank in different categories. And when I looked at the 2008 plan, it was like everything was ranked high. And if you go high, medium, low, you know, coming from industry, if it's a low priority, it shouldn't even be on the plan. We shouldn't be doing it. And so we tried to retune this actually, so we will get, if it's red, it's something we need to be doing immediately. And so our goal is to poll everybody, you, your staff. This is not limited just to our internal. You know, we're going to try to get some numbers on this to see what the consensus is, but to make sure that so when Kathy sets this up, you know, we'll know, you know, which recommendations are coming from the STEM AC or the CAC or the management board, but it's going to be important to get that to see where we fit for priorities. I'm not going to spend any time on this table other than one thing I saw when I looked at these 28 NEP CCMPs is that I kept asking, so what's the role of the National Estuary Program, our program? So all of these CCMPs, including our 2008, were very much outwardly looking. It was saying, well, this is what we need to do for the lagoon. But I kept asking, so where is the performance for the National Estuary Program? And so I took, and it's very lucky, as much as I hated that 5-year PE evaluation last year, it was a lot of work, I also loved it because it changed my perception about what would make us an excellent NEP. And so this is the logic model that we are reviewed each 5 years by. And so we have incorporated that into the CCMP with the idea that things that we do pursuant to federal authorization under the Clean Water Act really ought to be part of the CCMP mandate. And in the vital signs wheel, you'll see most of that over in the one voice section. So things like monitoring plan. And so we decided when we started to think about this generically that generic wasn't enough. You all have impressed on us, and we agree that, you know, we're about shovel-ready turn dirt. We're not about talking about it, we're about deliverables. So the question was, if we adopt this CCMP, what are the deliverables, the outputs of the program over the next 10 years? What do we actually own that we're responsible to and for? And so we have a list in this, which I'm going to encourage everybody to take a hard look at, you know, along with the tables that Matt talked about, and I just want to showcase where I think we are. So we know that our job, to do a successful job, pursuant to all of the guidance, is to get projects done. That's number one. We also see a real need to have information on a lagoon-wide basis. We have bits and pieces. So yes, we have lagoon-wide information on seagrass maps, but when was the last time you saw a seagrass map for the whole lagoon in one place? So we see that as a deliverable. A specific habitat restoration plan with identification of restoration centers, regional centers along the lagoon. So if the CCMP once adopted, you know, that would become a deliverable for us as we move forward. And I'm going to talk about how this fits with budgeting for our discussions in August in a minute. Science 2030 plan is in development. We would continue that. Climate Ready Estuary Report will have the vulnerability assessment funded by EPA in September for your review, and then we begin the second phase adaptation planning, which will be done next year. So that's already in progress, but it's indicated in the CCMP. The CCMP update is something that is mandated. Every 10 years we need to look at it, and every 5 we have the ability to revise. It's called an update. And so, I mean, the revision, each 10. So this is a plan looking forward to 2030. You know, we would be going to the next 10 years for the next revision, but at 5 we could update it if we need to. So, you know, one of my thoughts is that while that is the obligation under EPA, if we find that we need to make some adjustments, we shouldn't wait 5 years. If we've got something that we need to bring in, we should look at this as a working plan for us, even though it's broad. So that's the one lagoon deliverables. The one community deliverables is, you know, we've got a 2016 economic analysis. I think it needs to be updated no later than 2020 to check trends. That's going to be an easier task since the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council did such a good job. We have never been involved in our history really in emergency preparation, although in post-emergency we get involved, but we've never actually articulated what that is. And so a couple years ago, post-hurricane, we were helping DEP and our partners take phone calls from citizens, but I do think we need to actually have a plan. What is our role in preparation and post-emergency, especially as it relates to harmful and toxic algal blooms, but it could be anything, you know, big oil spill or a fire or a hurricane. We are expanding the IRL I-Squared, the Innovator Investor Network. We wanted to have that as part of the CCMP, so it's embodied in what we do on the financial and partnership side, and I'm going to give you some good news at the end of the meeting today on that. And then expanded cost share. And we have financial obligations under our review by EPA to be considering always, you know, getting enough money to do the projects. And then lastly, and this is where really I think the most value is for our direct deliverables and the one voice side, we desperately need to bring all our partners together and do a comprehensive monitoring plan. The CCMP mandates that. We are already mandated to do a communication plan pursuant to EPA review, so that's in the plan. We're moving the One Community, One Voice initiative, which brings us together. You know, that would be a standing operational delivery, that we would continue this. Direct support for staff and funding and resources, all of that is part of our review process, but we see three opportunities that are already in place that we actually went that next step and said, you know, we need to recognize excellence and support excellence. Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institution has been doing 6 or 7 years the Indian River Lagoon Science Symposium. Daytona State College a couple of years ago started its SHORE conference, which is undergraduates community engagement. And then there's this really beginning at Florida Institute of Technology with its Indian River Lagoon Tech Conference. We do support those now, but we decided that, you know, looking forward the next 10, we'll still do other projects and other events, but these three events are substantive, have statewide possibilities, and especially in the technology, the ability to bring the industrial and private sector in. So in the plan, we're recommending that this becomes part of our CCMP mandate. We're going to partner with those three regional projects. Doesn't exclude the other smaller ones, but these are going to be kind of a technology delivery, undergraduate research delivery, and then also the science delivery. They've all been ongoing. We partner anyway, but it just so happens that the geographic separation is nice too. It builds a story, bookends. And then lastly, State of the Lagoon. A State of the Lagoon report is something that is expressly expected from us by EPA. We have had long conversations about report cards. This is not a report card. And I will refer you all to the Narragansett Bay or even Chesapeake Bay. Narragansett Bay in particular, every 5 or 10 years, brings their science and engineering and technology people together, and they do a technical document. Where do we stand today? What are the emerging issues? It's expensive, but it's comprehensive. That plan that came out of Narragansett is 500 pages, but it does set the tone for how you would move in a CCMP. I think it's my recommendation at least, but council and our management conference can decide. I think that's where we need to be, that we need to start to bring in not just what we know, but where the gaps are, and to build a multidisciplinary team among these 22 research entities that we're already working with, and then that would be something that we drive. So in August, we'll have this discussion, but we have very carefully and I think very appropriately looked at the 320 funds from the federal government and said, let's do the science and the citizen engagement with that 600,000 and the local cost share that you all are bringing to the table for shovel-ready turn dirt. What I anticipate and what I will be talking to you all about in August is let's take that 600,000 from the EPA and drive these CCMP deliverables so we are in full consistency with the federal mandate and reauthorization, but we're actually delivering products that are useful to all 5 counties, all the state agencies, all the cities. And we'll give you more detail on that. But that was the thought process, that this dovetails with kind of where we're heading in budgeting, dovetails with that annual, business plan, but it's that broad 10-year window that still gives us the flexibility to respond to opportunity and risks and emergencies. And lastly, this plan, to be honest, and when I first talked to you, I had something in mind. This is a little more technical than I had in my head, because you see CCMPs, some are really, really technical and almost impossible to read. Some are so general, they're great to read, but they don't give you good guidance. I think we found the appropriate mix with our partners at Tetra Tech, but this plan does need, and it's important for citizens to get it. So as we move towards this end of our review period to a final draft, we will be bringing to you, based on that draft, basically a community guide to the CCMP. It's going to be super simple, just based on the 10 R's. What do you need to reduce? What do you need to remove? So a citizen sees their role, a city sees their role. The bottom line message is, if you have a problem and you own that problem, fix the problem. At whatever level you're at, federal government all the way to citizen. So this is Dwayne's really hopeful, maybe way too optimistic schedule. On Tuesday, we gave this presentation to the management conference, at least 2/3 of the management conference. Next week, we'll give it to our Citizens Advisory Committee. Their next job, so if you choose to release this, is that we will give them this draft report, and I have asked, actually I said I'm begging for this, I would like 100% of our management conference to weigh in individually. This is their role and responsibility, the most important thing they can do on this draft. So we have those edits. I will report quickly back in August about where we're going at our August 24th special meeting. But in a perfect world, we would be in final draft form mid-September, so we can come to our management conference committees and to you in your October meeting, where you would then basically declare this as a final draft. And I'm already briefing, some of our partners out in the community on where I think this is going. But the leagues of cities have to be involved, the EDCs. We need to have a coalition of agreement that this is the plan and we're going to all support it. If in fact we make that deadline, then when you declare that final draft will go to the EPA, Region 4, and to headquarters to make sure that draft meets the specific checklists. And we are already working with the EPA, so there's no surprises there. And so if in fact we have that, then we're thinking that we would, right after that October meeting, put that final draft to a 60-day formal public comment period, bring those comments in, make whatever revisions that might be necessary. In some cases, these comments come in and you take them under advisement. Some, get incorporated, some don't, but they all need to be responded to by staff. And that we would be adopting this CCMP with EPA certification sometime in early 2019. And the reason I believe this is an important timeline is because we're going into a brand new session. We're going to have congressional reappropriation discussions, reauthorization discussions at the federal level. And I think we would be very much empowered to say we have just revised and adopted our 10-year CCMP. And so with that, I'd just like to ask Cesar to step up, because we really are doing this with full contact and guidance from EPA as full partners in this from the beginning. And so Cesar, you want to make a couple of comments and we'll open up for questions and discussion.
Welcome back.
Thank you, Dwayne. And I don't have a lot to add because Dwayne was very specific about all the work that they've been doing. But I'm just here because I want to show our support and our commitment to get this done go through the process and do it in a timely manner. The region, specifically Jennifer DeMeo, which has been working closely with with Dwayne and his staff on the CCMP. And the process is we work with them to make sure when the document gets to us, we can go ahead and certify it fairly quickly. And we also try and involve headquarters through that process. We have a vested interest like you in making sure this works, and because of all the different water quality issues that we're having in the lagoon. So we want to make sure that this moves forward quickly. And we've seen that it's aligning very well with the Clean Water Act 320 requirements. So that would do is will help with when funding is available and so on, to place to point that, these are the requirements, and you can probably leverage that with other funding mechanisms like 319s and other local matches and so on. So I think that's a very good step that we've seen in the plan. And we're counting on the advisory and oversight committees within the management conference to make sure that they implement this and get it moving forward, and involving the community, which is a big, and the local governments, which is a big part of the NEP program. We remain available if you have any questions or any assistance where we can provide, and we fully support the efforts that the Indian River Lagoon NEP is doing. So thank you.
Council, any questions of Cesar? No? All right. Thank you. This is clearly a living document, and it sounds to me like you want to breathe some air into it to get her started. And any comments from the council? Just before we do, just want to say a couple things. One, I think it is critical that whatever comes out of the comments and so on and so forth, that each of our counties and entities are prepared to have our projects shovel ready and be able to put those in our own legislative asks, whether it be the state or federal side, for those matches, because that's incredibly important. Other than that, any other comments from the council? So what I'm hearing is a motion to put this out in draft form and to solicit comments from the management conference and others.
Yes.
Does that cover it?
That covers it.
Okay. Is there a motion?
So moved.
We have a motion. Is there a second? Motion and a second. Any comments or questions on the item? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. It is a very aggressive process by which you've completed, and thank you, Tetra Tech and staff. And we look forward to the comments from Management Committee and our public. So.
Thank you, and I will be interacting with you on a regular basis. You should drive this as deep into your staffs as you need to. So utility directors, everybody. So this is not just an internal, request. We're going to take comment from wherever it comes. So we'll keep you posted, and we'll try to expedite, at the same time make sure that we have adequate public comment and full participation of conference. So thank you. Probably the most important thing we will do in the first 3 years of our life as the IRL Council.
And if I could, for the counties and well, actually all of us really, because I recently had a conversation with FEMA, and they have a new mitigation process by which any of our stormwater issues could also be flood control. So if our staffs and our engineers are looking at projects we're going to bring forward for water quality, actually keeping water out of the system through flood control can actually be a benefit too. So I think you can start to see those synergies there, and that there is money available, and FEMA would rather mitigate than to pay for damages after a storm. So that is something that I've heard firsthand in Washington, D.C. And if it's helpful to our colleagues here, I hope that it works for everybody.
Mr. Chair, that's an important point, and so we did not share with you the spreadsheet on projects. We will do that now that we're sending this out so you can see it. That's going to be a living document, so as you begin to see projects come on board that may not have been communicated to us, that is going to be a constant edit. So make sure that your projects get on that list so we can help you when you're chasing dollars for those projects. So we'll be looking to you and your staffs to make sure we have information.
Thank you. At this time, I will take leave and provide you with the capable hands of Vice Chair Denny, and thank you all for your help today in moving these meeting along. I will see you next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, Frank, you're up. We have a budget amendment in 10A1.
Yes, good morning. Now for the fun stuff. Earlier, you heard from our auditors that fiscal year 16-17 has been closed out, and I hope you caught the quick phrase that we've got $1.6 million carried over into the next year. Spoiler alert, you do not have $1.6 million to play with. You have closer to $76,000, and here's why. The majority of those funds that are coming forward into the next fiscal year, this 17-18 year, are already encumbered. We've got a lot of projects that are coming over that haven't finished, that haven't had their final invoicing. So the majority of those funds have already been spoken for. Important to note that both of these resolutions before you today, developed by staff, have gone through the Finance Advisory Committee for review, discussion, and approval, and the Management Board and STEM meeting on Tuesday for review, discussion, and approval. The first budget resolution, 2018-3, is for the current fiscal year. It brings in the $1.6 million identified at the end of fiscal year 16-17 by the final financials. The changes to the budget are the following. Other expenditures, which are the project side of the equation, are increased by $1.3 million, and we've identified all of those projects and their amounts in the notes that are attached to the resolution. Operational expenditures are adjusted by $28,000 based on several items. The capital expense of the truck hit this fiscal year. We've seen ANEP dues, printing of the IRL calendar, and the annual report, which weren't experienced in the previous fiscal year, hit those costs. And we continue to see a decline in our use of legal services based on our ongoing experience and comfort level with how we negotiate our contracts. The net results of the projects and operations is an increase of about $1.378 million. We have an agency balance, which is those funds that are unallocated and available to be pushed out of 16-17, and in this case, and you'll see later in the next adjustment, towards the 18-19 budget of $76,676. So our fund balance beginning of the year increases by $1.4 million, which is that $1,600,000 identified earlier, and I am available to answer any questions that you may have about the amendment for the current fiscal year 17-18 before you.
Thank you. As I was reading this and you just said it again, it brought back to my mind, we have reduced our legal fees.
Yes, we have.
That's because of our expertise in our legal staff that can't go unnoticed, and the skill sets that they bring to us as a council. So thank you for that. That cannot go unnoticed.
Yeah, we've got great legal services.
And a great staff.
Yep.
Does not go unnoticed, and it's reflected in this. So thank you. Talk about a deliverable and an outcome. That's good. Okay, so right now, council will entertain a motion for the first budget amendment. We have a motion and a second, Any opposition to the motion? Motion passes unanimously. Okay, Frank, we're up to the second budget amendment. This one is 2018-04.
Thank you. This is for next fiscal year, the 18-19 budget. We already have an approved budget on the books and posted and noticed on our website. So we have identified $76,676 that we'd like to carry forward into the next year. This board has come back to us, and the management conference has also expressed the importance of finding funds so that we may go deeper into those project proposals in response to our RFPs earlier this year. The management conference recommends that we utilize those funds in the next year so that we may go 2 projects deeper into the restoration RFP. This budget resolution sets the stage for being able to use those funds on those next 2 projects. And I'll go ahead and alert you to the two projects in the ranked order. We're picking these up in ranked order, and that's important. We're not skipping any. Those next two projects are Marine Discovery Center's Shuck and Share fiscal year 18-19 for $50,000, and the City of Fellsmere's Micro Basin Treatment Phase 1 project for $50,000. Now that's $100,000, so we're going to be using $23,324 of project reserve to make up that difference. The project reserve already exists in fiscal year 18-19. So the net result of this resolution is bringing in that $76,000 and placing it in the other projects category so that in the next agenda item, should you decide, we have funds available to fund those two projects.
We have a motion to approve, second? Second. And a second. Any opposition to the motion? This motion passes unanimously with just a sidebar comment. First of all, thank you. Personal thank you on the Shuck and Share. I know that we just went down through the items and the projects. But I've just got to make a comment here because it's been put out there that these projects were approved yesterday at the management conference. The management board recommends, this board approves. So I'm just going to put a little place mark right there going forward for our management board that they recommend, but the final decision and discussion lies with this council. So that's all I'm going to say there. So noted. Okay. Sometimes you just have to say point of order. There you go.
Thank you.
Okay, item number 3 here. Dwayne, are you going to take this, or Frank, you coming back?
I'll be glad to take this one. Based on our previous two actions in today's meeting, and that we've identified 2 additional projects which we now have funding for in fiscal year 18-19, we would ask for a motion to approve funding of those 2 projects identified and authorize staff to negotiate and enter into contracts with those 2 entities.
Very good. Council will entertain a motion or discussion.
I move approval.
Have a motion, second?
Second.
Second. Any opposition to the motions? Motion passes unanimously. You're on a roll here, Frank. Okay, Kathy?
Good morning.
Good morning.
So we have been working with our Citizens Advisory Committee over the last year, basically, to develop a small grants program that was modeled on the Tampa Bay program. They have been doing this for a number of years. It's a really successful community engagement program, fairly low cost, and you all had approved funding for this in August of 2017. So this first round of funding was approved for $50,000. Let's see, I'm just going to get to it. The proposals were open to any kind of community group, a nonprofit, schools, and agencies, if the agencies could demonstrate that there was a strong volunteer component to their proposal. We received 27 proposals. 26 of them were ranked, and 1 of them was withdrawn. The CAC vetted all of those proposals, and they did that, the entire CAC vetted proposals. So they did all 27. Each person did all 27. We came up with a ranking, and they have recommended fully funding the top 12 ranked proposals, and there was a little money left over at the end, and so they recommend funding partially 2 others. So, and there is a slight difference in your agenda. The agenda says the top 12. There are actually 14, but they want to fully fund the top 12 and then offer $1,000 each to the ones that rank slightly lower. So the total award amount for this would be $49,959.
Very good. So we need 2 separate motions. 1 motion to accept and approve the final ranked list of projects.
Correct.
So council will accept a motion or discussion on that item.
So moved.
Have a motion and second. Any opposition to the motion? Motion passes unanimously. And we need another motion to fund the top 12 ranked proposals contingent and consistent with the budget authority and authorize staff to negotiate and enter into contracts with those applicants.
So moved.
Have a motion and a second? And a second? Any opposition to the motion? Motion passes unanimously.
Great, thank you.
Madam
Good
Chair?
news. Good news. Yes, sir.
We have one, I think you said 12, but it was, we have 14. So those two partially funded will also need contracts.
Right.
So the 14, we'll enter into 14 contracts.
14 contract. Do we
Yeah,
need a
sorry
new
about
motion
that.
or to amend it?
I think amend the motion just to be, precise.
Okay, we're going to amend the motion to, oh, I see, okay, got it. To amend the motion to include the top 14.
So amended.
It's so amended and seconded. Any opposition to the amendment? 13? Oh. I was going to say leave it to the DEP, but I didn't even say that. Okay. Is there any opposition to the motion? No. Okay, without opposition, including the DEP, is in complete agreement with everything we're doing. It's a good day. Motion passes unanimously. Okay, and we're striking, we've moved C up, so we're to D, new appointment to the management board. Susan, would you like to make this appointment? Would you like to discuss this?
I think we did it at the beginning.
We did it? We're done?
Yeah,
We
actually,
moved them up?
we
Okay,
handled that
that's fine.
early,
There you
so I
go.
think we're good.
That's right, all right. Informational reports. Here we go. Financial statements?
Yeah, you have financial statements, third quarter report, and with progress of that last third quarter and workload end of year. No action is necessary. It's for your information only.
Very good, thank you. It's great reports. Okay, you're up again, Dwayne, for your executive director report, sir.
Okay, first I want to introduce, and I told him to sit up at the table. I guess he got a little shy. Stand up, Reed. For the first time, we have a student intern with us. This is Reed Coffey. He's working on his Bachelor's of Science at Florida Institute of Technology. We have him as a summer intern, and he's working with me directly to identify water technology companies, and I gave him, the whole state. I said, focus on the lagoon, but let's look at any organization, private sector, who's doing technology on biomass, wastewater, and so he's assembling an impressive directory that we can begin to work with. And so the end product of his summer internship, we're planning on maybe doing a presentation at IRL Icon, but he has been doing a yeoman's job for us, and we're really glad to have you, so welcome aboard. You see the third quarter progress report in your package. I do want to kind of have you take a look at the next 6 months ahead. This may be the biggest 6 months we've had, and we've been pretty busy, but we're going to be on a full run from now until end of calendar year. Also in your package, and you'll see it here, is an agenda from the Biosolids Summit. We teamed up with the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council. Last year we talked about doing, kind of science summits, and this one was appropriate for us to partner with. It was an excellent, well-attended discussion, probably of most interest with some of the new technologies we got to see. And so if you want to follow up on that, weren't able to make that meeting. I know a number of you were. I think Mike Bush at Treasure Coast has got all the videos online. But we did see some remarkable technologies and had good panel discussions about issues and next steps. And Drew, have you identified, at that meeting, DEP said they were going to identify was it a technology review team or an advisory committee? What's the status of that?
So let's talk about biosolids. It's a very popular topic these days. So the department is standing up a technical advisory committee. That's a formal committee, subject to sunshine and all the works, to look at biosolids management in the state of Florida, see if there's any opportunities to update that with new information, new science, new technology, as we proceed on managing biosolids in the state of Florida. We did a solicitation for nominations. We've gotten a good number of them. We are actually starting the review and evaluation of those nominations this afternoon, and probably through the next week before we announce, the formal team, and then start those meetings in August. So that will be that is the arena we are creating to really have good scientific and policy dialogue about biosolids in this state. In the interim, there is a local item. It's not an Indian River Lagoon necessarily item, but it's an Indian River County item where Blue Cypress Lake has had significant increased levels of phosphorus in the lake. There is a lot of discussion about biosolids being applied in that lake's watershed. And so just yesterday, we did send a letter to the biosolids applicator on the site proximal to Blue Cypress Lake, and there won't be any biosolids application for the next 6 months at that site while we undertake a thorough study of the lake and its sources to be able to identify, what management actions need to be taken going forward to protect that lake. We are starting that process. I just sent the letter to all the Indian River County commissioners so that they could have that as they deliberate issues in their county. So we are standing up a lot of effort around the biosolids arena. We appreciate the Treasure Coast of starting that discussion and look forward to bringing some of those dialogues and discussions to the Technical Advisory Committee.
Very good, thank you.
Okay, the next item is just a reminder. We have a special meeting August 24th. We'll be discussing, RFP process as we look forward to the 2019-2020 fiscal year. If you have agenda items, Kathy will be reaching out to you, and we've gotten a number of suggestions already related to that, but that will be the point where I think we will begin to discuss how this fits with the CCMP. So by all means, if you have issues or concerns that you think we need to address in that special meeting, let us know so we can get them on the agenda. And lastly, I just want to report, I had promised you all that my goal this year was to try to double the number of innovators and investors in our network, and to try to get at least one representative from each of the 5 counties. I haven't quite gotten full representation countywide, but I want to tell you who we've added so far. So we've gotten a cash contribution from Coldwell Banker Paradise. They did a fairly massive open house weekend, a poker run, on behalf of the NEP and the Lagoon, and we have a check in hand, and they have joined. The Sebastian Rifter Arts Club has also brought a cash donation to us, and so we will be working with them. Dredging and Marine Consultants, LLC, out of Port Orange, Volusia County. The CEO and president, Shailesh Patel, who I've met with, is really interested in seeing us continue to engage both with that shore, the Daytona College Shore Conference, but also to try to really invigorate this technology discussion. And so he has offered his expertise and his deep network in water technology to start helping me network out. So I'm going to be working directly with him to kind of meet some of the folks that he deals with in the the large dredging, so we can start to assemble and expand this database that we're working on. Florida Institute of Technology. I cannot thank Kevin Johnson and Florida Tech enough. They're in our Science Advisory Committee, but what they provided to me was full faculty access to their electronic library services. If we were to purchase that as a small organization, it would be thousands of dollars. And so that was a massive help for me to get direct access to peer-reviewed journals, which helped to drive the timeline on the CCMP. And so, kudos to them. I mean, this is not easy. I've tried to do this in state universities for years and failed. And so I really appreciate that help. Groundswell Startups, which is an incubator, a private sector nonprofit incubator in Melbourne, is working with the Space Coast Economic Development Council with the intent to have a Hack the Indian River Lagoon event this fall. A hackathon, I had to go look it up. It shows me how old I am. You know, normally you have, you know, really bright computer people trying to hack software and build new software. We are working on what this will look like, but the vision is a full 3 days where individuals at any level of a startup would come in for a weekend and actually do like a Shark Tank review with groundswells, really their investors and their principals, and then give an award at the end of the weekend to, you know, the project that's most innovative, most likely to commercialize. And so I will keep you all posted. We plan on putting the word out on that beyond just Space Coast so we get a good response. But that should be a lot of fun. And, you know, we'll see what we get out of it, but who knows, you know. Maybe we'll get the next generation of septic tank out of this and it only costs $10, in which case we should all invest. Two more. Florida Air Tours, President Mark Granger at Port Canaveral has offered helicopter service to us in times of need and emergency. So he said, when we're in Bloom, and I you know, have been wanting to trigger it, and Mark has been really good about, don't worry about it. I really have been careful not to just want to get it airborne, but if we have an issue, he doesn't have full, you know, delivery access because of, you know, gassing, and the fact is, though, we have access almost to Kennedy Space Center and probably down to the southern end of Indian River County. And after that, we'd probably have to make other accommodations because he'd need to fuel up. But he has offered that service, and we appreciate that. And lastly, it's just the beginning of a conversation. And so thanks to Councilwoman Denny's, I had a massively impressive tour of Boston Whalers manufacturing facility in Edgewater. And we have extended an invitation. We have talked about the IRLI squared. We're trying to figure out the right fit, but we are in discussions with Boston Whaler about how to expand our connection with them, but also with the maritime industries. So once again, I'm going to ask you all, you know, this entry is easy. You know, these companies are bringing different skill sets, some hard cash assets, some soft. But we want to build this as our connection to industry. And so as you see industries who want to get involved, we will work with them to find the right fit. And so that'll add 6 immediately, and I've got a number of others in the works, and I'll just keep you informed as we go. And Madam Chair, that's all I have for today.
It's a pretty good day, Dwayne. Thank you. Okay, council member reports. We'll start down here. Drew.
So the one thing I wanted to let folks know, one of the projects on the list of projects we funded was the West Wabasso Septic to Sewer project. And the NEP funding was great. It didn't get them to a full project cost. So I just want to let everyone know that the department is funding the remainder of that project so it can actually go forward and get constructed. And so I think that's a good thing. And that kind of brings me to my second point is we partner with every single county here on doing stormwater projects, septic projects, wastewater projects. And as we go to our August meeting, one of the concepts that I had in my mind is, and I just want to put it in everyone else's, is that IRL NEP funding pot is really not big enough to do construction projects, right? I mean, it's just not that big. But it is big enough to get construction projects ready, to compete for water management district cost share, which requires permitted projects before they even come in the door. And it really elevates the competition for DEP funds if they're ready. So one of the concepts I had in my mind is really using the NEP to make sure that projects are teed up and compete well for funding, whether it's legislative funding or the next. Because that's the first question that any funder asks is it permitted? You know, is it designed? Where is it in its stage? Because everyone hates taxpayer dollars just sitting idle. So anyway, that's all I have, Chairman.
Very good, thank you.
just to follow up on the biosolids discussion, we will be talking about that at our commission meeting on Tuesday. We're very grateful for what DEP has done, and we look forward to continuing that partnership, and also very grateful for the West Wabasso Septic to Sewer project. So thank you for all that you're doing, and we look forward to working with you on multiple other projects in the future. That's all I got.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick update, a lot going on at the South Florida Water Management District, as you could all imagine. We heard earlier that we had a lot of rain, especially in the month of May. It broke every record, on record for the month of May. And to give some perspective, Lake Okeechobee rose 700,000 acre feet in the month of May just due to rainfall. And that's one of the reasons why we're working so diligently on what's called the Lake Okeechobee Watershed Project on the north end of Lake Okeechobee, which will have incremental benefit to the lagoon and to the estuary. That will treat 480,000 acre feet. To give you perspective of the 700,000 that rose from that huge record rainfall event in May, this project alone would treat 480,000 acre feet. And in the past week, the tentatively selective plan, the PIR, and the environmental impact statement was issued by the Army Corps on that project, so we're moving forward with that. There's been a lot of great movement with our federal partners on the EAA project under the leadership of Governor Scott and the Water Management District and our federal partners and our delegation. We're making great progress on the EAA project over the last month, so we're excited about that. The C44 project, our STA component that the Water Management District is building, is planning to come online by the end of this year, so we're very excited about that. So next wet season, when that comes, that will be fully operational. And of course, the reservoir on the federal side is a few years behind that. Lakeside Ranch Stormwater Treatment Area, the second phase of that will be coming online here later this year, which will also give us some additional treatment when we get into the wet season next year. Coming into that, Calkins Water Farm, private-public partnership, Martin County, fully operational, running this year, giving us additional treatment in the C44 basin. 10 Mile Creek, as you know, up in St. Lucie County, is fully operational, running up in St. Lucie County. Had some discussions with St. Lucie County staff in the last couple of weeks about projects that are critical in St. Lucie County. We know C2324, that reservoir, that discussion, I'm personally looking forward to seeing that move forward in my time on the governing board, because we know how critical a project that is in that basin to see that project move forward for treatment for the lagoon. The last thing I'll leave you with, the satellite imagery that we saw earlier and that we're seeing a lot of Lake Okeechobee, which as that satellite image gets more purple and red and those different colors, and it can be a very intimidating image, I would just keep in mind that that is not necessarily translates to the amount of algae on the surface of the water of Lake Okeechobee. So when I've had the opportunity to fly the lake, when others have had the opportunity, certainly we have algae signature on the surface of the lake, but don't let that translate, that satellite imagery, to where it's purple, that there's necessarily these big, huge green masses of slime on the surface of the lake, because that is not true. So even though it is indicative of signature for potential for algal bloom, is what that satellite imagery shows, people need to understand, in a little silver lining, if you will, that there's not this massive amount of green slime that is headed their way, the way that it is portrayed in those satellite images. So you have to really understand, and that's something I learned here in the last couple of weeks as well. So making sure the public is up to speed on that is very important. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Great report. Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, two things. About 4 years ago, when water farming, dispersed water storage was first brought to light, started in the South Florida Water Management District primarily, and then finally into the St. John's. One of the Achilles heels of that issue was when a landowner was leaving water farming or dispersed storage to go back to farming, that they would be allowed to do that. And when we first started to discuss this issue, I was even told by my own guys and a lot of landowners in South Florida that I used to work for that that'll happen when pigs fly. But we kept at it. A lot of people have been working behind the scenes to get a document that's fair and equitable, and that will stop the discharges that are local going to the Indian River Lagoon here. It's the biggest single quickest measure we can do to move water rather than east, to move it west, where it can be treated and held for a future water supply, for hunting, for fishing, anything but put it in the lagoon. Well, pigs just might be flying. We finally have a working document written by Fish and Wildlife and by a host of other people that have had input. It's not final yet, but I just wanted to let you know that it's getting darn close, and we think we're within a couple of months of having a document that will appease everybody, and it'll be fair to the landowners, give them a fair and equitable exit strategy after helping for a 10 or 20-year period upholding massive amounts of water, billions of gallons from going into this precious lagoon. I think it's the biggest single step that we can have with our local drainage. There's bigger issues with the C-44 and some conveyance issues there, but for us locally, this is a huge step because now more landowners that have been sitting on the sidelines going, that's condemning me to being, you know, marsh in my cattle ranch or citrus grove for the rest of my life, and I can't afford that. Well, voila, I just can't wait to see a pig fly. I really can't. That's going to be a wonderful day because I worked very hard to get everybody to the table, and everybody feels pretty good about this. So I'm anxious to report at our next meeting we got this done. But I just want to give everybody a heads up. That's number one. And number two, about new inlets or flushing. My grandfather-in-law was the first chairman of the first inlet commission, and he told me when they used to go out in the boats from Lake Worth Lagoon all the way to the Banana River, most of that river system had a sand bottom. We've cut canals and conveyance systems that brought in muck and deposited. Now it's no longer a sand bottom except for right around some of the inlets because of incoming tide bringing sand. But it's all muck bottom now. We have hundreds of thousands of people that have moved in. We have rooftop strip malls, golf courses putting on fertilizers in their lawns. One of the tools we have to consider is how to flush this lagoon. My grandfather-in-law wanted to put tubes under the island of Palm Beach to help flush the Lake Worth area, right where the West Palm Canal comes in from Lake Okeechobee back then. And he hand dug the first inlet with an ox cart to break through the island of Palm Beach. They got the mayor of Riviera Beach drunk to allow that to happen. That's a true story. It's in the minutes of the town hall meeting. That's a true story. But anyway, I think it's a tool we got to figure out and get bright engineers either that we have here. We got a bunch of great people or University of Florida engineers to show us where and how to cheaply design a flushing mechanism because it can and will be done. It's a tool we got to consider to a lagoon that more people are going to live along, and it's going to have more rooftops, not less. The open areas are reducing by the minute. I know my ag is stumbling, and we need to bring those people in as a part of the solution, not as a part of the problem. And I just think that it's there. It's not that big a rocket science issue to allow some flushing at the right points where the environmentalists and engineers can come together to help us design that. It's got to happen because it's the only relief that this lagoon used to do. Our nuke in Hutchinson Island sits on an area when I was a kid that used to flush right there. That used to be connected. On and on. Nat Reed, bless his heart, and may he rest in peace. He sent me where Peck's Lake used to have one. Right here, Sebastian Inlet had a natural one. You had them up at the Cape. And they used to flush naturally. Build up in the summer, flush out for months, and then seal back up. Read the Barefoot Mailman. It'll tell you all the inlets that he used to cross as he delivered mail. It's a tool we got to consider. It's what the lagoon used to do. It's a natural process, and I'm glad we're looking at it. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Sounds like you need to write a book.
Not me, but there's some other brighter people that should.
I think you've got some good stories. Just briefly, I'll just share Volusia County. We just the last meeting, approved our BMAP update here. And then 2 weeks ago, on June 21st, we did a water quality meeting at the Daytona Beach Airport, and I want to thank Dwayne DeFries for coming up to be part of that panel. Our panelists included our executive director, Mr. DeFries, Shalish Patel, who's our president of Dredging and Marine Consultants, whose specialty is muck. In fact, he said when he retires, his book will be called Getting the Muck Out of Here. True story. We had Dale Jenkins, he's bureau chief from our St. John River Water Management District, Chad Truxell, the executive director of the Marine Discovery Center, and Shannon Spees-Frost, the program administrator at the DEP. So it was a great panel. It was more effective than we anticipated. And when I stood in the back of the room and when I heard our great connector from St. John, Abby Johnson, who's our district representative, ask Shannon from the DEP a question on how to best help a constituent with an issue, the light went on for me. We talked to each other, but to have the ability for state and federal agencies in an atmosphere like that to ask questions to each other for implementation, effective implementation, was just one of those moments that, okay, this is really good. We're going to follow up, well, we say about 6 weeks from now, Dwayne. The DEP, Shannon's agreed to come back and do a technical meeting to help assist cities and organizations and universities on how to even apply and to work through some of the technical information required for some grants. So it was overwhelmingly successful. Thank you, Dwayne. Thank you for all that we're doing. And the next up is our next meeting announcements. Our special meeting, August 24th, is that going to be, what's the time element? What are we looking at in time on this? Are we looking at just a couple hours? Are we looking at a working lunch? What's going to happen?
So we're not quite there yet because we haven't seen what you all have for an agenda. What are we thinking, a half day? Turn your mic on.
We were thinking about starting at 10, and if we go into lunch, we can bring lunch in. So you won't.
I'd like to think we can get out by 2, but a lot of this depends on how deep you go. There's, we have some minor issues of just cleaning up existing RFP activities, but some of the issues that Drew just brought up are, I think, worth some discussion. And so I think we're going to need at least 2 hours. So I'm looking to you for some guidance. So do you think we could do that between 10 and maybe 12:30 and do it in 2.5 hours? I'm kind of looking at you all because this is the first time we're going to have kind of an open discussion about where we go for a future budget.
Go ahead, Drew.
Probably one of the most important things we do is this RFP, and so I would set aside enough time to make sure we have the right kind of discussion.
That's what
and then if we get done, if we're all just miraculously in agreement, maybe we can leave early, but I would certainly set aside till 2 o'clock or something.
I totally agree, and this is hopefully going to be more of a free discussion, free thought conversation instead of a structured meeting like so it'll be more casual, so we can have more back and forth dialogues, which tends to make things go a little longer, which is a good thing because we've never done this before. So I have a feeling there may be some suggestions and discussion coming through. So I agree. I would plan till at least 2.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and schedule 10 to 2, just as a point of order, really. The reason we didn't call this a workshop is that because of our timelines going into RFP, with the next year budget, we really are looking to you all to make decisions on this so that when we leave that August 24th meeting, that staff has enough specificity in your guidance to put together those RFPs so that we would have the draft RFP, kind of that process ready for you in October so we can release in our normal cycle. If we get too much later, then we start driving against, next year's budget process, the demands of EPA with because we're a year in advance with EPA funding. So we're going to be looking to decision points, and hopefully you will have agreement, and you know, you'll give us some clear direction on what you'd like to see for that fiscal year 2019, 2020.
So I should not have called it a workshop, you're right. So there will be votes taken.
There will be votes taken, but
It will be an advertised meeting where we can give actual
But we will
action.
set it up for that ability to have dialogue, which is also why we're not having it here. And so we've been doing our advisory committee workshops in a location that's really good for sitting around in a circle, you know, and having a conversation. And we will extend invitations to the management conference who want to come and attend and, you know, weigh in with comments or thoughts. So not really an all-hands meeting, but we hope to get some clear direction for 1920 from you.
Very good. Okay, thank you. And then our next regular Board of Directors meeting will be Friday, October 12th, right back here at 9:30. Management Board meeting Tuesday, October 9th. STEM AC meeting Tuesday, September 11th. And our CAC meeting will be this Thursday, the 19th. With that, anything else? Council comments? With that, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.